Dreaming of an unconventional life? You listened to the podcast, you devoured the YouTube videos, but have you actually taken action yet? It's easy to get lost in research and inspiration. We all have the ability to piece together our ideal life, but getting started is often the hardest part, especially when it feels complicated and overwhelming. My mission around here is not just to provide the education and inspiration you need, but also to guide you step by step to take real tangible action. If you're ready to transform your vision into a practical action and a money plan for your unconventional life, let's connect. It's time to visit the Tiny House Advisor to book your call. Hey there, welcome to Less House, More Moolah podcast. It's Laura. I wanted to talk a little bit about small and small as compared to tiny. We're going to get into some of the legalization pieces of choosing an alternative home that is tiny or small and kind of compare and contrast these two concepts because there's some changes that are afoot and I thought you would want to know about it. So if you haven't yet encountered the idea of a small residential unit, we just touched on it briefly in the Zach Giffen and John Weisbarth episode. And it's something that is increasingly being discussed. There is some controversy or debate around the concept and the motivations behind it. But as I, like you, am just a home dweller and trying to figure out how to create the most resilience and financial security through my housing choices, I think that this is worth talking about. So, the reality is that not everybody wants to live in 399 or less square feet. This is the current, say, technical definition of what a tiny house is. I, from the very beginning of my work in the tiny home world, have really considered tiny more of a intentional choice in terms of choosing something different than the largest house you can afford in order to be more intentional about your space, about your cost of living, and about the life that you want for yourself. So to me, tiny equals intentionality more so than square feet. But nonetheless, within the building industry, there is some bifurcation between things that are $399 or less and things that are over $399. Now, one of the reasons that this has so much legal complexity when one tries to put a $399 square foot or less home on, say, a piece of land or in a community or in a backyard is that there are so many layers of rules and considerations, things to think about. And so the industry of builders, the industry's associations, advocates have been really working on a grassroots effort to municipality by municipality create provisions or rules or ordinances that allow for $399 or less square foot homes to be allowed. There is another further split between those that are on wheels and those that aren't on wheels. So some places will allow a $399 or less house if it's on a permanent foundation. Other areas allow the $399 or less home if it's on wheels. Each municipality, each jurisdiction that has rules and enforces those rules has the ability to kind of write the rules that meet the needs of their population and their services and utilities. So it is very complex to understand and peel back all the layers of the rules when it comes to choosing what we technically call a tiny home these days. So there is some movement towards larger, shall we say, tiny homes, things that are somewhere in between the $399 or less and the typical American home that's being built these days. As perhaps I've touched on before, builders who build homes are really trying to maximize their profit margin. They're trying to build the right square footage that gets them the price point that allows them as a business to create the most profit. And so they build homes that frankly are larger than what some folks would want. There are calls from many directions asking for smaller homes. A huge part of it is about affordability. When we can't afford the home that's being built because it is too large and expensive, then there is a huge segment of the population that's underserved from a housing perspective. There are so many people that would otherwise like to own a home, but they can't afford where we are in the housing market in terms of price plus interest rate. But builders, by and large, keep building these larger and larger homes, therefore pushing up market, meaning that they are constantly building homes for wealthier and wealthier people instead of for the average person. As I've mentioned probably before, average home price currently sits at around $430,000. Interest rates remain high. Therefore, you have to have a six-figure household income in order to purchase the typical home. Metro areas largely are more than the typical average price. So builders are building homes for people that have six-figure or larger household incomes. So where is that middle ground? So if the $399 or less is not legal everywhere, and maybe it's not suited for everyone in terms of family size or wanting to have a guest bedroom as an example, then where is that middle ground? The middle ground lies between the $399 and the larger homes that are being built today. So middle ground may look like townhomes or condos. It may look like some of the smaller homes that are being built, though a small percentage of all the homes that are being built. And so there is a growing request within the community, within the country, within the potential home buyers or potential downsizers looking for something in between. I live in 308 square feet myself. The property that we have in Colorado has a cabin that is 640 square feet, and I love 300. I probably like 600 better in terms of 2 people and 3 dogs. It also allows us to have someone staying with us. So it allows that guest or a family member to stay for maybe not forever, but it just provides some extra space there. So I think that, a $399 tiny house with a first floor guest bedroom is one thing that really perhaps appeals to me. So when we look at homes that are a little bit bigger, but not getting into a 2,000 square foot house, there are modular, so off-site built options that are coming to the market. You could obviously hire someone to build you a 600 square foot house these days. The challenge there is the fact that you are still going to be like a tiny home, including all of the higher priced points of a home into a smaller package. So therefore, the per square foot price there is going to be larger. So if we think about a 2,000 square foot house, we're going to pack in a kitchen and a hot water heater and air conditioning and heat and all the things. But a lot of that square footage is just, flooring and 2x4s and insulation and roofing. So once you get outside of the expensive mechanicals and infrastructure, maybe the per square foot price of the build goes down as you get into a larger and larger package, as long as you're not adding a second kitchen or a second AC unit, right? So there's some economies of scale there in terms of building larger homes because it's not the same per square foot price because you're not having to put in all of those higher cost items over and over again. You're just expanding the footprint. So when we build, say, a 600 or 700 or 800 square foot house, and we still have all of those expensive mechanicals and expensive heating and air conditioning, all of those things there, and we still have to hire the same number of contractors in terms of all the different trades, then it can be a little bit more pricey on a square foot basis. So there's some awareness that needs to happen there. And we're kind of accustomed to where the price points are on tiny homes. And so if we start looking at more square footage, certainly the price is going to go up. And so then it starts to get into that, how affordable is it really? If it's midpoint between, it's not a $399 square foot house and it's not a 2,000 square foot house, but the price is leaning upward into a larger home price, then where is the market for that? Are people willing to pay that extra square foot price? So a lot of questions as the industry evolves and as smaller homes maybe start to present themselves as options. But for us who live or want to live in a small or alternative living space, smaller is still better in many ways. It is still a lower cost. It is still able to be paid off potentially faster. It is less to maintain. It is less to have to pay for from a tax perspective, less utilities. All of these things are still really beneficial. And if we can add a little bit of value in terms of having, for example, a guest bed or whatever the extra space is, a work office, right? A work office would be something that I would love to have added onto my tiny house, which we're working, of course, on in our studio building. But these are important aspects, I would say, of the general lifestyle that folks are looking for. So this small home, which is currently being called small residential unit, is showing up in the discussion around tiny homes. Earlier in this episode, I just was breaking out some of the layers of legalization complexity when it comes to a $399 or less, what we call a tiny home. And so when we get into maybe a small home, so 4, 5, 6, 7, 800 square feet, then some of those legal complexities still exist. Certainly, you're not going to find a 600 square foot home riding around on wheels. So largely, this would be something put on foundation. But nonetheless, many jurisdictions, municipalities have minimum square footage requirements that may be more than that small home package. So this is a really key piece, is you have to understand what are the rules on the land that you're considering. Small homes likely aren't showing up in tiny home communities either because they would be more of a permanent placement. Small homes are not going to allow you to travel around the country and see all the states that maybe you're interested in and then decide on where you want to settle permanently. So small homes have limitations. They are essentially a big home, just in a smaller package in terms of how they operate and how they are connected to utilities and how they affect your mobility. So small homes really only serve the folks who want to be sitting in one place with their home, but they do have the advantages of having a little bit more space, so therefore having a little bit more flexibility about use of space. So this is an interesting solution that is showing up, but perhaps currently with no less or easier solution, though perhaps the funding or the lending or, mortgage might potentially become more viable with small homes, being that they are not going to be on wheels or temporary in any way. And if the IRC work that's working on building code standards ends up in the residential building code, then it would be easier for the typical residential industry to embrace small homes and create the typical pathway like a single family residence. So if you're sitting out there really thinking about, hey, I'd like to go tiny, but I'm not really sure that I can do 399 or less square feet. I really need a couple of things that I can't get in tiny homes. And by the way, I am comfortable with building and sitting in one place, and I am willing to pay a little bit more to have a little bit more square footage, but I just simply don't want the 2,000 square foot home, for example. Then it might be worth staying in touch with what's going on in the small residential unit, small home market. If small homes were to come to market, if builders started to build them as an example, I think we would see a lot of demand for them, both from downsizers, first-time home buyers, and lots of people in between. And so it'll be interesting to keep an eye on this and see what happens in terms of demand for any small homes that are built. In the meantime, of course, there are all kinds of other options available, all kinds of creative alternative living solutions that we can explore, and that can be stepping stones in a way, or can be long-term solutions with a little bit more adaptation. Of course, I live in this 300 square feet, but I'm working on a workspace building with greenhouse that will expand the total footprint beyond the 300 square feet and will give me some space both for guest and for working. So there are all kinds of ways to work within the infrastructure, work within the parameters, work within the rules, work within the systems that exist. We don't have to feel stagnated or stuck. There are ways to creatively work within the world that exists around us. And of course, it'll be hard, but we get to pick our hard. So if living in a smaller space is something that interests you and you would like potentially more than 300 square feet, of course, there are ways to work around that. But it is interesting that the housing industry, the affordable housing advocacy world, everybody is calling for small homes. Everybody's calling for small homes. So it'll be good to see small homes show up and see how that folks are getting on board with that concept and maybe breaking down barriers to something that is a little bit smaller. So in previous episodes, I did break down zoning versus building codes. We've talked about all the legalization, but let's be frank, it's confusing and it varies from place to place. And some places have rules that don't actually follow the rules or enforce the rules. That's what's going on where I am. So you have to kind of dig beneath the surface and maybe not take no for an answer and do things that are unconventional with a little bit of bravery. If you need support with that, that's why I'm here. So I am excited to continue to follow what's going on in the small home world and keeping my fingers crossed for more solutions for more people. Thanks for being with me this week. Come back next week. Less House More Moolah podcast is created, hosted, and produced by me, Laura Lynch, here in my tiny house. I'm so grateful to you for being along on this journey with me. We are not alone in wanting to live a life that is more gentle on our earth and provides us with financial freedom. So when you have a conversation with someone else considering what alternatives are out there, make sure you share this podcast with them. Let's bring them along with us. Please see the show notes for an important disclosure regarding the Tiny House Advisor LLC in this episode.